Hi everyone, welcome back to Carpe Diem Sailing. If you're new to the channel, my name's Marco. I'm a Sail Canada cruising instructor, and in today's video I'll be talking about international distress signals. Welcome to episode 34, International Distress Signals. In my last episode, we talked about pre-departure checks and preps in a way of staying out of trouble. But sometimes, despite our best efforts, we do get into trouble. So I thought that in this episode, I would talk about how to get help should we get into trouble. So we're going to be covering internationally recognized distress signals. I've put together the 16 most common ones into a little PDF document here, which you can download from our show notes on our website. And I've organized them in such an order that I start with the ones that are purposely designed to call for help, and then some that are adapted. So we're going to start with the ones that are purposely designed, that you can buy, commercially available to have on your boat should you get into trouble. And some of these are actually required by law, depending on the requirements in your country. So the first one we're going to start with are flares. So with flares, there are 4 types, A, B, C, and D. Different countries, different sizes of boats have different requirements for how many of each of the flares you need to have. So consult with your requirements. Make sure that you're up to date with the exact amount that you need by law. And again, that's the minimum required amount. You may want to have more of them and a better variety of them depending on where you're cruising. So having said that, most of these international distress signals can be the same, can be said for them. So if you're cruising offshore, you're going to probably want to have a few more options than if you're cruising inshore. So once you've covered all of these, you decide what you want and what you need on your boat for the cruising that you do. The other thing about flares is they do have an expiry, and the expiry changes from country to country. In Canada, it's 48 months from the date of manufacture. And in the US, it's 42 months. So consult with the requirements in your country and make sure that you're up to date with everything that you need so that you're legal when you're out on the water. So let's talk a little bit about these flares. So we're going to start with a type A flare. So the type A flare is a parachute flare. So there's a rocket in here that launches with a parachute. It goes up about 300 meters or 1,000 feet before ejecting the flare, and then the flare burns underneath the parachute, and it burns for about 60 seconds, and it's visible for about 30 nautical miles. So the nice thing about the A, or the good thing about the type A and the type B that we're going to get into next, is that they're good for attracting attention, for letting people know that you're in trouble because they can be seen from a long distance. So one of these is about $60 Canadian. The next one we're going to move to talk about is the type B, the multi-star. So handheld, hand-launched. You hold onto it here, you pull the cap, and there's a little string, and it launches 2 red balls. They go up about 30 meters or 100 feet, and they burn for about 5 to 6 seconds. So nowhere as long as not as long as the parachute flare, and certainly not as visible as the parachute flare. But 6 of these is about $150. So given the amount that you need, so in Canada we need 12 flares for a boat of 9 to 12 meters. So, and they're good for 4 years. So replacing 12 flares at $150 each every 4 years, is costly enough without having to do that with these guys. So the type C is a handheld flare as well, and it burns right from the end of the flares, much like a roadside emergency flare. The thing about these is that these are useful once you've used your A and B and you've called for help, or maybe you've used another method to call for help, like a radio or something like that. The C and the D that we're going to talk about next is useful for helping people locate you and pinpoint your location, because you actually hold onto this while it burns. After I'm finished talking about the D flare, we have a video on that I did in an offshore survival course a year ago, or a couple of years ago, and we actually did launch some practice flares, or we set off some practice flares, so you get to have a bit of an idea of what it looks like. The thing about these flares as well is this one has a burn time of 60 seconds. So that is what it says on here, burn time 60 seconds. So talking about that, make sure that you familiarize yourself with the instructions on the flares, and you know how to use them, and you know what kind of flares you have on your boat. It's not just enough to buy the flares because you have them, you need them by law, throw them in a box or a cupboard somewhere and never take a look at them. Make sure you know how to use them. that's the whole point of this video, hopefully, that will familiarize people with how to use flares. This is also a type C handheld flare by a company called Orion. This one actually lasts for 3 minutes. So different flares will have longer burn times. These are all red. The one you're going to see in our practice video is white, and they're a practice flare. We did get permission from the Coast Guard to actually set them off as part of the practice in the course that we were doing. And the other thing about that flare, the flares we're using here, there in the video, and you'll hear the instructor talking about that. He mentions that those flares are SOLAS. So SOLAS stands for Safety of Life at Sea. If you want to look it up, go ahead and look it up. I'll put a link to SOLAS in the description below. But basically, the SOLAS equipment that's required is at a higher standard, set to a higher standard. So a little more expensive, but it does have some benefits. One of which is the handheld flare doesn't drip slag. So if you've ever used one of those emergency roadside flares, you'll see that they burn very hotly and they actually drop burning bits of slag. And that's the last thing you want to be doing, is dropping burning bits of slag on your gel coat of your boat. So if you are using any of these handheld flares, make sure you hold them out over the water. And the last one we're going to talk about is the type D. The type D is either buoyant or handheld. So handheld like this one. The buoyant one will last a bit longer. This one burns burn time of 3 minutes of very thick, heavy orange smoke. And once again, once somebody's out looking for you, you deploy the smoke, and certainly from the air you're quite visible, but it is useful as well from surface vessels looking for you as well, because it is such a big cloud of orange smoke. So moving on, we're going to take a look at that video, and then we're going to come back and we're going to carry on with the rest of the distress signals.
Yeah. So the one, if there's a few things we really want as takeaways. The first one is the standard, and you'll see a chart. This is Safety of Life at Sea, standard of flare. The difference between this and what would be the U.S. Coast Guard or Transport Canada approved, they're more money, but they also glow brighter for a longer period of time, and they last longer. And Safety of Life at Sea flares, their standard is to not drip slag, whereas the normal flares can. So, but why does government have lower standards? Because they want boats to have them. But when we're going offshore, if you're doing, say, a Category 1 Vic Maui type race, or if you're going cruising offshore, you're going to want to have SOLAS quality flares. So this is a handheld. Now, the second one, the point I want to make certain we stress is when you get back home on your boat, or if you haven't already done this, or on any boat you go on, make certain you don't wait until an emergency to read how to use the flares, because you look at it. Let's go work on it go together. So let's read number 2, Mitchell.
Read number 1.
Read number 1. What does it say?
Unscrew cap and point away.
Number 1 says that?
Number 1?
No, it doesn't.
Number 2. Pull out white hand until engaged.
Okay, I'm going to do that, but don't you do it, okay? There. Did you hear it click? If you don't hear that, if you pull it out like this and you don't hear that click, it means when you light it, it could go back down like this and burn you. Because what's going to burn is all of this. This is going to glow red hot. So you're not going to touch this, you're going to hold it by what it says. So what does number 2 say? Do you want to read it out, please? What does number 2 say?
Unscrew cap and point away.
Okay, on these handheld flares, this is the cap that covers the trigger, right? So I'm going to do it, you're not yet. We're going to do it together later. Okay, here's the trigger mechanism. So you'll notice there's a ball with a line on it. I'm not going to pull it because I'll activate it. Now number 3. What does number 3 say?
Pull ball out sharply to fire.
Okay, so what you're going to do, you can either pull it sideways or you can pull it straight out. It'll be about a 2-second delay until it fires off. Don't point it at your partner. We're going to stand here and we're going to just hold it out this way, right? Because eventually it won't do anything. When you first pull it, it'll kind of make a little bit of a hissing sound, and then all of a sudden you're going to get a flame shooting out, which is in fact the signal flare. Don't look at it when you pull it.
So the next thing we're going to talk about is a dye pack. Now, I've never used a dye pack myself. My offshore experience to date is fairly limited. I don't have a life raft on my boat, but certainly if I was going off the west coast of Vancouver Island or offshore to Hawaii or any oceanic passages, we would have a life raft and some other equipment as well that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And then you would have a dye pack. And the dye pack is quite useful, again, to help people see you from the air. So the life rafts are bright, but they're quite small. You put the dye pack in the water and it does give you that much bigger of a shape that they can look for. So hopefully you're more easily seen if there are aircraft looking for you. So number 3 on my list is a VHF radio. So the VHF radio, till just a few years ago, was voice. So channel 16 was the international distress signal, and you would get on channel 16 and you would ask for help. And how you would ask for help is by calling a mayday. So now something I want to talk about for people who may not have taken a VHF radio course is there are people out there who call maydays for things like engine failures. That is not what a mayday is designed for. A mayday call is a distress call, meaning that life is at stake. So life or vessel is really in peril immediately, and that's what a mayday call is all about. An urgency call, which is called a pan call, is designed for getting help, but it's not immediately, the vessel and life are not immediately in danger. So maybe you've lost your propeller or you've lost your engine or something like that. So you might get into danger and there's some urgency to it, but you're not at the mayday yet. So do your homework and find out the difference between a mayday and try to use them appropriately. Hopefully you never need them, but certainly I've used pans quite often, never even come close to needing to use a mayday, but I've certainly had engine failures and rudder failures and things like that where I have called for a pan, and I've managed to get myself out of it on my own, but it does get resources kind of alerted and coming out to you if you need any help. The other thing with the VHF radio nowadays, I'm not going to get into a huge amount of detail about this now, but now VHF radios have what they call DSC. So DSC is digital selective calling, and it's part of the GMDSS. GMDSS is the Global Maritime Safety and Distress, or Safety and Distress System, something like that. I'll have links to it down below as well. And then another acronym is the MMSI, which is an identity of you and your boat. It's a number they give you that you actually apply for. I'll have links to all of that stuff down below. But just know that nowadays, not only can you call for help by voice on channel 16 using a mayday, but with your equipment set up properly, you can actually use your DSC as well as with your MMSI number, which gives you the type of vessel you are and all the rest of it. So look into that. It is all part of a VHF operator certificate that most people need. Certainly in Canada, you need that to legally operate the radio. They're quite cheap. You can get them at any safety or power squadron. They offer them. I do believe there might be some online. If I find one, I'll put it down in the description. So enough about VHF radios. We're going to move on now to a more primitive system, which is a continuous sound signal. So something like this, or a permanently fixed air horn on your vessel. The thing with these is they will run out. The other thing with these is that if you hold this down for any more than sort of 5-6 seconds, they do ice up. And so they'll actually stop working. So if you ever need to use this and you want to use this particular distress signal, which is a continuous sounding, don't just hold it down till it's empty. Just go in short bursts, but do it continuously. And also be careful, point it away from people. They are very loud. Okay, so continuous sounding of any sound signal is considered to be an international distress signal. And next we're going to talk again about something I don't have a lot of personal experience with, are EPIRBs. So an EPIRB is the Emergency Position Indicator Radio Beacon. They've been around for many, many, many years. The technology has certainly come a long way. And there are small ones called PLBs that you can wear on your person, as well as bigger ones that can be thrown into the water and activated. And they will send out a signal and activate emergency rescue services to come and find you. So again, offshore, definitely have an EPIRB. Off the west coast of Vancouver Island, I would probably have one. For the kind of coastal cruising I've been doing, I have not found the need for an EPIRB. In addition to EPIRBs, I talked about the PLB, the Personal Locator Beacon, and then there's also the MOB1, which is a personal AIS. So again, an AIS system is new technology where you can be, it's a boat identification system. And if you have AIS on your boat and you can link it up to the MOB1, you can actually, the boat will actually find you. So do your homework, find out what's appropriate. I was supposed to do a transatlantic passage last year, and then COVID put an end to that. We were going to go with the MOBs because we had AIS on the boat. So some people have PLBs and AIS. It's up to you. You decide what you need. There's also something called a SART, Search and Rescue Transponder. I don't know that much about them. I've just started looking into them recently. But again, do your homework. I'll have links to SARTs down below. But similar to an EPIRB, they will help get people to come to your aid if you are in trouble. Number 7 is the distress cloth. So the distress cloth is commercially available. As you can see here, I put it out on the front of the boat and you tie it down, and it's the ball and square on an orange background. So the ball and square on the ball and the square, either a ball above a square or below a square, is also considered an international distress signal. So if you have ball and square day shapes, you hang that in your rigging, it is considered to be an international distress signal. Waving arms up and down. So make sure that people, I can't do it here because I don't have the space, but make sure you wave your arms up and down very, very clearly. When I was teaching back in the day, one of the textbooks said don't do that around helicopters because it tells them to land. I would like to think that a pilot will know when it's time to land, and he's just not going to land willy-nilly because somebody on deck is waving their arms. So it is considered an international distress signal to be waving your arms. Make sure it's very clear up above and all the way down so somebody knows that you are actually looking for help and not just waving at them as they go by. SOS, so which is dit 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 dot 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 dit dit dit, so 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots, international signal for requiring help, came around about the time of the Titanic. I don't think it was actually used. They had a different signal then, and then since then they've come out with standardization, the SOS. Certainly you can use that again with a flashlight, or if you're in a life raft with a mirror, whatever. Just dit 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 dot 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 dit dit dit. SOS in any way that you want to send it is an internationally recognized distress signal. Code flags. So again, most of the code flags in the alphabet, so every letter in the alphabet has an associated code flag. Not all of the code flags have a message associated with them, but some do. So in the case of distress signals, one of the internationally recognized distress signals is the code flag November, which is the letter N, over the code flag Charlie, which is the letter C. So N over C, as you can see here flying in my rigging, is considered an international distress signal. The last one I'm going to talk about, last two actually that I'm going to talk about, is firearms. So should you have a firearm on your boat, I'm not going to get into how controversial that is and pirates and all the rest of it. I see enough of that on Facebook, on the Facebook posts. But should there be a firearm, if you're on shore, whatever, if you have access to a firearm and you have enough ammunition, a firearm discharged at 1 minute intervals is considered to be an international distress signal. And I don't think I have to say that if you are going to be doing that, make sure you're discharging it over a safe area up in the air, away from people and, development, that sort of thing. So if you are going to be using a firearm in a distress situation, make sure you're doing it safely. And then the last one, which I think is probably fairly obvious, is flames on a vessel. So any open flames on a vessel is considered, for good reason, to be an international distress signal. So I'm going to finish on that. Take a look at our PDF. I'm glad to have you download it and keep it on your boat. And we'll see you in the next episode. New episodes go up every second Wednesday at 6 p.m. See you next time when I talk about some handy accessories for sailing. Thanks for watching. Until then, I wish you all fair winds and following seas.